So I've had this PRS Silver Sky for about a month now, and first things first, I dig it. I really, really like this guitar, and it is one of the finest Stratocasters that I've ever played. And that's one thing we have to make clear for this video, is that this is still a Strat. As much as the marketing tried to tell us that it's not, I certainly think it is. However, it is a unique S-type guitar with some really interesting tweaks that show how well thought out this guitar was. So this video is going to be 6 or so things that you might not know about the PRS Silver Sky that might sway your opinion on it. First of all, the elephant in the room. This is a John Mayer signature guitar. Now, I'm not suggesting that you don't already know that. What I am saying is that even though it is a John Mayer signature guitar, it doesn't force you to play like John Mayer. It doesn't force you to play John Mayer style licks. Even though, yes, I am inspired by John Mayer's playing and it is a certain aspect of my playing, this guitar allows all the other parts of my playing to shine as much as that part. Yes, I suppose it sounds really good when you play slow dancing in a burning room, but that's not all this guitar can do. If you like this video and anything else that you see on this channel, please subscribe and go watch some more videos. It really does help me out. Okay, so moving swiftly on, let's talk about the headstock. Let's start at the top of the guitar. This might look pretty regular for PRS, but there are definitely a few things going on here that is not obvious at first glance. If we focus on this lower carve here, I've got my Fender AVRI 50s Strat here, and you'll see that those two lower parts of the headstock are extremely, extremely similar. This means that when you are down here playing open cowboy chords, it feels very familiar, and there's nothing in here getting in your way. Very cool, and something you might not notice just by looking at it. The other thing that I've not seen on any Strat ever is that it is ever so slightly angled back. Very typical PRS thing to do, but this, along with how straight the strings go over the nuts to the tuners, means that tuning stability is just impeccable. It really is good. Let's move on to the third thing I want to talk about, and that is going to be the neck. Again, there's a few more things going on here than meets the eye. When these guitars first came out, all I could hear people talk about was the 7.25 inch radius, and people were really upset about it. And to be honest, I can't actually tell why, because now I've played this guitar, I can tell you that that radius thing doesn't matter. It just feels so comfortable to play whether you're up high or down low. Another thing when it comes to the neck is that this guitar has really skinny frets, really small frets, which was surprising for me because I've grown up playing a lot of vintage inspired or modern takes on vintage guitars. And one of the first things that brands do, like Music Man, is slap on big jumbo frets. Not here, not with this guitar. They've stuck with the sort of vintage style tiny frets. Your left hand feels much closer to the guitar, much closer to the fretboard would. Feels really good. It emphasizes that feeling of the guitar being like an extension of yourself, an extension of your playing. Vibrato, you're rubbing against the wood. Must be another way to say that, but it just feels really good. This one is rosewood, as you can tell, and other than it's lovely and dark, it's incredibly thin. It's an incredibly thin piece of rosewood, which I was actually surprised about. If we compare it to my Music Man Cutlass, it's almost half the thickness of the Cutlass fretboard wood, which is also rosewood. Even behind the nut on the Silver Sky, the kind of fretboard wood tapers off to be almost wafer thin. I'll show you some close-ups, but it's quite impressive. I actually don't know the reasoning behind this or the benefits or cons of having a thin piece of fretboard wood, but it's cool and it surprised me nonetheless. The last thing we ought to talk about when it comes to the neck is the general profile. I believe during the development process of the Silver Sky, John sent in a handful of his favourite vintage Strats from 62 to 64, and PRS basically combined the best parts of those necks to create this neck. And so what you're playing when you play a Silver Sky is basically the ultimate 60s Strat neck, and it is really, really great. The best way I can describe it is that it is really elliptical feeling. It almost feels like you're holding a perfect semicircle in your hand. Really interesting feeling neck. I dig it. Definitely vintage inspired. Definitely plenty in the hand. Right up my street. To the body, and I do actually want to talk about the design differences and design choices when it comes to the body shape, the body cut. On first glance, it does look almost identical to like a classic Fender Strat. You know, you'd be mistaken to thinking that it is just a Strat, but there are some tweaks, some choices that have been made here that show the intention of this guitar to make it more ergonomic. I'll be comparing it again to my Fender AVRI 50 Strat. Yes, I know that guitar has 50s correct Strat contours, which are not what we know now as normal Strat contours, but it's the best I got. The belly cut on the Silver Sky starts much closer to the top horn, almost an inch away from the end of the horn, and ends much further away from the bottom of the guitar. So the whole belly cut has been shifted upwards. This feels much more natural to me and sits more comfortably where I hold a guitar, whether I'm sat down or stood up, so I'm sure you would feel the same as well. It's just moved up a bit, up maybe an inch or two, and it just works better if you ask me. Flipping over to the front of the guitar, we'll talk about the arm cut. And again, it sort of is very similar to a Strat contour, but shifted ever so slightly to be, well, just to make more sense in a way. If you look at my 50 Strat, the arm contour is sort of on the bottom of the guitar, almost like there. But on the Silver Sky, it's much more on the top of the guitar, which is actually where your arm usually is when you play. You can see how drastic the difference is if you look at the guitars from the bottom. I'll put up some close-ups again, and it just makes sense how the Silver Sky is. It just works better. And finally, maybe the most obvious thing is this lower horn here. It looks a bit smaller, seems a bit smaller than on a Fender Strat. It definitely comes to a bit more of a point with the scratch plate, and there is a classic PRS cutaway. So when it comes to the body, a lot of subtle choices here that to me prove that they actually did break down that original design and sort of started from the ground up with what actually should have been the original from the first place. fifth thing I want to talk about is arguably what I find most impressive about the Silver Sky. The amount of unique parts and hardware pieces on the Silver Sky is quite frankly staggering. You won't find a lot of these parts on any other guitar, let alone any other PRS guitar, apart from the SE model, I suppose. The monetary investment PRS must have made just to, machine this jack socket and to make the molds for these knobs must have been crazy, because literally I would say 95% of the parts on this guitar are unique to the Silver Sky. And I don't think you can say that about many other guitars. All the way from the tuner buttons, which are actually my least favorite thing on the guitar, to be honest, to the switch tip, the knobs, the scratch plate, the jack plate, like I said, the pickups, the body and the neck, obviously. All of it is unique. The neck plate is unique to the Silver Sky. PRS must have been pretty confident that they were going to sell a ton of these guitars to make that investment and make that choice. They could have easily just put standard parts on this guitar, but no. And turns out they were right. Okay, last thing I want to talk about, and it's something that is very important to me personally, and that is the finish. Now, there seems to be some questions online about what type of finish PRS use on the Silver Sky. I've seen some information that suggests that when the Silver Sky first came out, they were using poly type finishes, but then in 2019, 2020, they switched over to nitro finishes. I'm not confident confirming or denying that with the information that I've seen. So what I can say about the finish is that it is truly a flawless finish. But most importantly to me anyway, is that it is obvious that it is a very thin finish, a really, really thin finish. And I believe that that does help the wood of the guitar breathe more, resonate more, and in turn make it sound better. You can tell how thin it is in places that you can actually see how the finish has ever so slightly sunken into the wood, and you can see some bits of the wood grain coming through. I absolutely love that. I love that. So there you go, 6-ish things about the PRS Silver Sky that at least I didn't know before I owned it. Maybe you don't know those either. I don't know, maybe you knew all of them. Maybe this was a complete waste of time for you. If it was, let me know down below, and cheers.